Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. And if we can have everyone make their way to their seats, it would be greatly appreciated so we can get tonight's program started. My name is Tyler, and I'm honored to be tonight's MC for our annual gathering. Thank you for braving the weather to join us this evening. That is no small feat. We had, a month plus of no rain, and tonight we have rain, but thank you regardless. The rain is not going to dampen our celebratory spirit tonight as we celebrate the intertwined history of the forest and Duke University. In just a moment, President Vincent Price will open the evening with welcome remarks, followed by Duke Forest Executive Director Sara, who will share more about the intertwined history of the forest and the university. Later, we'll enjoy a panel discussion on the future of Duke Forest, moderated by Lori Benier, Standback Dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment. Our esteemed panelists, Toddy Steelman, Vice President and Vice Provost for Climate and Sustainability, Nicolette Cagle, Senior Lecturer in Environmental Science and Policy at the Nicholas School of the Environment, and Sara, each bring a unique perspective and relationship with the forest and are eager to help us explore what's next for this incredible asset. With that, please join me in welcoming to the stage Duke University's 10th President, Vincent Price.
Thank you, Tyler, and good evening, and welcome to all of you for this very special Duke Forest annual gathering. I'd like to begin by thanking Sara and the Duke Forest team for organizing this centennial event featuring the history and the future of Duke Forest. Sara and her team do a tremendous job of preserving and nurturing our forest, and I'd like to ask you all to join me in thanking them for their work. I'm so grateful to be part of a great university with such a wonderful forest. From the moment that Annette and I arrived here in Durham, we've loved spending time in the forest and on its trails, whether that's the Shepherd Nature Trail or taking in the beauty of the rhododendron bluffs overlooking New Hope Creek in the Corstan Division. The forest is a special part of our life in Durham, and I know that is true of so many in this room. Indeed, even among the select group of universities fortunate enough to have their own forests, Duke is particularly distinctive because ours is so close to campus. Indeed, we're surrounded by it, and this allows the forest to play an enhanced role in teaching, in research, and in recreational activities. This year's centennial celebration is an extraordinary opportunity for us to celebrate Duke's distinctiveness and unite our campus community around three common objectives that are highlighted throughout tonight's program. First, the centennial is an opportunity to learn from our history and to celebrate the people who have fueled Duke's progress as we contemplate the road that we've traveled over these past 100 years. Second, our centennial is an opportunity to demonstrate the impact of our present and the great work that Duke students, faculty, staff, alumni, and friends are doing right here in Durham and around the world. And third, it's an opportunity to look ahead to the potential of our future and to lay the groundwork for even greater things to come in our second century. Tonight's program will explore Duke Forest's role in each of these domains, highlighting the many ways that the forest has supported our academic mission since its founding in 1931. And it will also highlight the important role the forest is poised to play in our second century. I'm grateful that you're here with us today. I thank you for your support and engagement in Duke Forest's mission and success. And with that, I am delighted to turn the podium over to Duke Forest Executive Director Extraordinaire, Sara.
Wow, well, that was very special. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, especially on this cold, rainy day. I was so concerned that many folks wouldn't show up, but you're all here, and why not? This is such an incredible resource for all of us to celebrate. So again, thank you. I also want to thank the Nicholas School of the Environment and their dean, Laurie Benier, both for sponsorship of this event, but also just for their general support and care for all the work we're doing as the Duke Forest Teaching and Research Lab. Similarly, I want to thank the Office of Climate and Sustainability and our Vice President, Vice Provost, Toddy Steelman, for her support of this event, but also all the work we are doing as the Duke Forest Teaching and Research Laboratory. And then I must also give a shout out to my team, Tom, Tyler, Tim, Leanne, Maggie, Craig, Zach. I think I got everybody. Did I do it? Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Without them, yes. This really beautiful event and all of the things that you see that we're into would not be possible. So, let's get into it. There we go. Now, I have the great privilege tonight of presenting this forest, this teaching and research laboratory, as an indelible, uniquely valuable, evergreen, and ever-evolving asset of Duke University. And I am able to do this because I stand on the shoulders of visionary and shrewd leaders of both the forest and the university. And a few of them are in the room tonight. Mr. Judd Edeburn here, former resource manager. And actually, I misspoke. Dr. Norm Christensen, who is also going to be here, couldn't join us tonight. But I think it's important, again, as Vince said, this is a moment to really think about the past that we stand on and all that that's afforded us. And so I'm eternally grateful to both Judd and Norm for what they've done for this forest and what they've done for me personally as well. So given that it's Duke's, sorry about that. Given that it's Duke's centennial year, we really wanted to mark this moment in the forest story as part of an important future in Duke's second century. And so, like you heard Vince say, we're here to reflect on that past, present, and future of this Duke Forest Teaching and Research Laboratory. And because it's the centennial, we brought it here to campus in order to welcome a wide audience of our Duke faculty, staff, students, and administrators, alongside our Duke Forest supporters, neighbors, and donors and friends that are beyond Duke. We really have an incredibly huge family of people, both at Duke and out in the greater region, that care about this resource. And so being able to offer it here in this larger space was a great way to bring us all together to celebrate. So we're going to start deep in the past. And before I tell you that story of the intertwined connections between the university's founding and the forest establishment, I want us to think about human history on this landscape having been in play for over 10,000 years. So what you see here on this slide are actual artifacts that were found in the Duke Forest. These are various rock-hewn tips, beginning in the Paleo-Indian period, coming all the way up to the late woodland period, which intersected with the arrival of the first European explorers. And it's important to note how deep this human history is, because while I will share with you and focus mostly on the last 100 years of the Duke Forest landscape under Duke's tenure, we have to remember that humans have been on this landscape interacting with the bugs, birds, microbes, fungi, plants, animals, rocks, and waters for over 10,000 years. That's incredible. And it's one of Duke Forest's most enduring values, both to Duke University, but the community at large, that it continues to offer tremendous opportunity to connect with this deep and layered human history. Uncovering these deep historical human stories allows us to learn from and grow from the stories that have been less well known, suppressed, or just simply have gone untold. And this is an area of work that we're involved in right now pretty actively, and we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more at tonight's panel. So for now, let me bring you to the centuries just before Duke's founding in 1924. So in the 17 and 1800s, we know there was this forced confluence of Native Americans, European settler colonizers, and enslaved Black and mixed race peoples. And this was really a cataclysmic unfolding that forever shaped the land, but also these peoples and their descendants. This map, titled as shown, shows the approximate location of Native nations across the Southeast around the year 1700. Poignantly, it also shows the lines of battle actively waged against Native tribes by the earliest European colonizers. And so I want to acknowledge here, as we do in our Duke Forest Land Acknowledgement, the Native nations whose communities were displaced or killed through war, disease, and colonial expansion. I'd especially like to honor the descendants that survived and live today in the Triangle area, including the Haliwa Saponi, Saponi, and the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi. We recognize your continuing connections to land, water, and culture, and offer respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Now, at this same time, this map, which shows the Middle Passage and the transatlantic slave trade, we had enslaved Africans, raw materials, manufactured goods bouncing around the Atlantic Ocean between Africa, the eastern seaboard of North America, and Europe. And so I also want to honor the people that shaped these lands that were stolen from their homelands in Africa and enslaved in these new ones, some of which are now Duke Forest. We know of at least 5 sites where slavery was practiced on Duke Forest lands, and we recognize the ongoing harm produced by the legacy of slavery and oppression, and we offer acknowledgement and respect to the descendants of these communities that live today. So this is a very simple quote that I think captures a lot of the theme of Duke Centennial Year. You can't change the past, but the past can change you. And I am forever grateful for those folks that have shared their wisdom and history and stories with me so that I could better appreciate these deep and even more recent human histories on the land and what that means for the Duke Forest land base today. So I would especially like to acknowledge here the wisdom and history shared with me and others here at Duke by members of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, to whom we are neighbors in Alamance County. I'd also like to acknowledge the Mayo family, who originally owned a large portion of the Duke Forest that contained the quarry that produced the famous Duke Forest stone. I appreciate their family history that Rodney Mayo and his relatives have shared with me, and most recently on a walk through the woods that we had with them. These windows to the past, I carry as an important reminder of accountability, and I carry it as an inspiration to the way I lead and influence the stewardship of these rich Duke lands under Duke's tenure. This forest is a continuous wellspring of insight, of knowledge, of connection to our human and non-human past within Duke and beyond. So these sweeping acknowledgements really are still insufficient, but I think they give you a good picture of the history upon which the formation of the Duke Forest really stands. So for the rest of tonight, I'm going to focus on that origin story of the transformation of Trinity College into Duke and how this forest came to be birthed in 1931. So first, I'm going to start you with a map to orient you all a little bit to where we are, but I want to show you, so Duke West Campus on the right-hand side of your map, all those big green blobs heading west from campus are present-day divisions of the Duke Forest. You can see the locations of the city and county of Durham, the town of Chapel Hill and Carrboro, and also Hillsborough, and get a sense for where these lands are in this triangle region. And I want you to pay particular attention to the Durham, Corshton, and Hillsborough divisions. They're very important to this origin story. So here we are at the transformation of Trinity College into Duke University. In 1924, the Duke family endowed Trinity and named it for Duke. And under the direction of James B. Duke, then Trinity College President Few began acquiring land in order to expand this campus and build their vision of a world premier university. But when word got out that Dukes were financing land purchases, and so for those of you that don't know, Trinity College here is really the East Campus location of Duke University today. When word got out that the Dukes were buying land, prices began to skyrocket. And so President Few found a local realtor named Murray Jones to actually head a little west and a little south and to try to find lands that they might bring together in order to build out this university that they envisioned. And so Murray Jones did that, and he was quite successful. Between 1924 and 1929, he acquired over 8,000 acres of land. Now that is a lot of land, and nobody intended to build a campus that large. So what was going on here? What motivated all of that land purchase? And why was there so much land so readily available? So herein lie several interesting and intersecting stories through which we get the Duke Forest. So the Dukes, being the successful industrialists that they were, they knew that it was important to control access in the form of roads and railways to this new campus that they were building. So they bought the land to build this connector road between existing highways, or existing roads at the time, what we now know as Highway 70 or Hillsborough Road and US 15501. They bought the land in between so they could build this connector road, which is Highway 751, and now Academy closer to campus. And so those land purchases actually became the core of what is the Duke Forest largest division, and that's the Durham division. And of course, it's just immediately west of us from where we are today. So also by the 1920s, the Duke family had been involved in the hydroelectric power industry for about 20 years. So when they learned of a nearby creek that had supported grist mill sites through the 1800s, they were very interested in looking into those lands and seeing if there was any hydroelectric potential. Now, of course, that never materialized, but the acquisition of all those lands became the core of what we now call the Corshton Division. And the Corshton Division protects several miles of New Hope Creek, which is an important tributary to Jordan Lake Reservoir, a drinking water source. Corshton Division is also one of the divisions where we have a lot of active archaeological and historical work going on. Now, another driver. We talked about access. We talked about the potential for power generation. They needed raw materials. And to build this beautiful campus in the Tudor Gothic style that they imagined, they were going to need lots and lots of stone. So they were looking to all of the quarries in the north, and they had a smaller effort in North Carolina to see what they might find locally. And in the state geologist's office, one of their investigators found a piece of rock that had these hues of blue and red and yellow and orange. This all sounds familiar, I'm sure. It's all over the buildings all around us right now. It's pictured here. This is what has ultimately become our very famous Duke stone. And so when this was found, Duke immediately ordered the purchase of the mineral rights and then the lands around the quarry that would become the source of all this stone. And the Mayo family that I mentioned in the introduction, some of this quarry was on part of their lands originally. And so Hillsborough Division is also special because it protects over a mile of Eno River. And Eno River, of course, is another important tributary to the other major drinking water source in our area, which is Falls Lake Reservoir. So we understand the main motivators that were driving all of this acquisition of land, but we haven't gotten to the question yet of why so much land was available. And so truly, and this is a very brief story in history, but those 19th century farming practices of those European settlers really just exhausted the landscape. The topsoil was lost, the nutrients were gone, and their practices were such that they would exhaust a piece, move on to the next until there were simply no more pieces of land left for them to farm. And so families became extremely challenged, even just trying to feed themselves from their land, from their own lands. And at the same time, there was work in the textile and tobacco mills of the cities. And so families were actively leaving their land to make their way and provide for their family. And so when Murray Jones went searching, it was really this glut of degraded agricultural land with some interspersed woodlots that he was able to secure. So the forest came together from a compilation of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small tracts of land. And of course, what's very interesting is that much of the American South and the Piedmont, so right, Piedmont is between the coastal plain and the mountains, much of the Piedmont area across the American South, particularly in the Southeast, it looked like this. It was a gullied, eroded landscape that lacked any productivity of any kind. And so President Few contemplated the future of this land. And interestingly, because he was a Harvard graduate and Harvard had the first teaching and research forest, he thought that a model like Harvard had might work here. And so enter Dr. Clarence Korstian, recruited by President Few to combine Few's experience with the Harvard forest with Korstian's own with the Yale forest. And together in 1931, they put 5,000 acres of land into management and set as the Duke Forest Teaching and Research Laboratory. So that really is the birth of the forest. It was that excess of land that was purchased in that attempt to build out that beautiful big campus. And what we ended up with was a lucky happenstance that we could have a teaching and research forest that would help us understand how we restore productivity to our landscape. And so, under the direction of Clarence Korstian, local crews replanted large areas of Duke Forest. Students and other faculty went about understanding how forests naturally regrow after agricultural abandonment. And of course, as we all know, Clarence Korstian was the founding dean of the School of Forestry. And really, that School of Forestry was all about developing the forestry practices that would restore productivity to the American South. So herein begins the legacy of scientific contributions from the Duke Forest. Eventually, observations derived from permanent sample plots established under Korstian's direction, they helped develop the idea of old field succession. So how do forests come back after old field abandonment? They also ended up describing the soil characteristics that gave rise to loblolly pines and how fast and how well that they grew. And so here I want to share one of the happy accidents of history. So Korstian had established these in the 30s, and for some decades around the 50s and 60s, these data were lost, only to be refound again in an old file cabinet and brought to the attention of two budding early career ecologists. And these ecologists very excitedly took on this data, resampled these plots, and actually put out some of the first papers that showed how forests were actually changing through time. And they were able to dig in and explore some of the ecological mechanisms that were driving that change. So those two budding ecologists are now globally recognized emeritus faculty, our own Norm Christensen, again, founding dean of the Nicholas School, and also UNC's Dr. Bob Peet. So, the university has been founded, the forest has been established, the teaching and research in forestry in the South is underway. And so in our next chapter of evolution, I really want to talk about how the school and the forest changed over time. And really, through much of this transition and evolution period, from about the 1940s to the 2000s, the forest and the school were very, very closely connected. And at the same time, both were developing values and uses that were making them both very valuable and ever important assets to Duke University. So what began as the School of Forestry became the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and finally in the 1990s, the Nicholas School of the Environment, where students now receive PhDs, professional master's degrees, undergraduate degrees in many focal areas, of which forestry is just one of many. Likewise, on the Duke Forest, the research being pursued really began to expand and broaden beyond the study of trees. So pictured on the slide here in the top left, you can see members of Emily Bernhardt's lab studying aquatic biogeochemistry and its implications for greenhouse gas emissions and heat pollution dissipation in our waterways. On the top right, you see Steve Kummer out of the Pratt School of Engineering, using the Duke Forest to understand the natural phenomena of lightning and sprites occurring in the outer reaches of our atmosphere that have a lot of implications for our global communication systems. And on the bottom here, you see the main laboratory of the Center for the Environmental Implications of Nanotechnology. This was in the Duke Forest. This was a major research project that combined 10 universities, but it was headquartered here at Duke, led by Duke's Mark Wisner. And again, the main laboratory was here in Duke Forest. So similarly, to accommodate these broader academic pursuits, the way that the forest was being managed and who was managing the forest began to shift over time. So instead of in Korstian's days where it was discipline-specific faculty managing the forest for specifically academic contributions, it became a resource manager and administrator that was facilitating the academic mission, but also really elevating and managing all of the other benefits that the forest was providing. And it was in this period that the forest came under the purview of the Executive Vice President's office at Duke. And why this is significant is that it was really the first major recognition that this Duke Forest Teaching and Research Laboratory is a university-wide and community asset. And so we sat from that perch up until just a year ago, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. And so let's get into what were those other important benefits? What did we have to start managing for beyond the teaching and research mission? Well, of course, to keep carrying out that teaching and research mission, we needed a healthy forest. So we needed to sustainably manage the forest resources to promote forest health, to protect biodiversity and water quality, and also to manage timber production. So forestry was the original focus of the teaching and research mission, really born out of necessity. But forestry and timber production on the Duke Forest today accomplish multiple goals. It still provides an interdisciplinary academic pathway in the Nicholas School. It provides a source of revenue for forest operations. It provides diverse habitats for animals that live on the landscape. And finally, and importantly, it provides an opportunity for all of us that are really an urbanizing kind of public to understand what does renewable resource extraction actually look like for a product we depend on in our everyday life. Also, during this time, it became clear that because the forest had been set aside for teaching and research by Duke, it was also providing incredible value in protecting unique or rare natural and cultural resources. So pictured here on the slide, on the left-hand side are a Catawba rhododendron, which is a rare species in the Piedmont, but because of some unique geology and microclimates in the forest, it exists. And also one of our state species of concern, which is the four-toed salamander. And this female salamander is unique in that she protects her clutch of eggs under a canopy of moss until they hatch. Now, these are the types of species that we protect in areas that we call natural heritage natural areas, and these occur over 1,200 acres of the Duke Forest. Similarly, the forest is home to one site that's on the National Historic Register, and this is the Hogan Plantation. And it's on the Historic Register because of its contributions to understanding early plantation life in this area. And it is one of those locations I mentioned earlier where we know that slavery was practiced. So of course, with the size of the forest and all of the activities happening on it, it also made sense that another objective of the forest management became providing education and outreach. So allowing the community to come and connect with the science that was happening on the Duke Forest, the management that was happening on the Duke Forest, all of the beautiful birds and animals and things that made their home on the Duke Forest. And so providing education and outreach became a cemented management objective. And then, of course, recreation. The nature-based recreation and aesthetic amenity that the forest provides is invaluable, and it's really only been growing ever since 1931. And Corstian really recognized and appreciated that the reason they had so many lands in the 30s were that families were no longer on their own lands. And so he made it an important priority that these lands would remain open to the public. And so we manage the forest now to provide for these recreational and aesthetic amenities. And you can hike and bike and walk and picnic and bird watch across 35 miles of graveled road and over 13 miles of dirt foot trail. But of course, teaching and research, it remains the heart of our mission, and it remains the primary focus of our management of the Duke Forest. And what's pictured here is not the first global change project, but probably the largest and the most famous. This is the Free Air Carbon Enrichment Project, or the FAX-1 experiment, in which under otherwise natural conditions, elevated carbon dioxide was pumped into plots in the forest so that scientists could understand how trees were going to respond to all of this extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This project was led by Ram Oren, a Nicholas School faculty member, but over 260 investigators and researchers worldwide participated. And then, of course, likewise, our facilitation of teaching and research has continued to evolve. So well beyond Duke's graduate and undergraduate classes, to the K through 12 and lifelong learning community, to classes coming from other institutions of higher education. So, today, where are we today? We're in a really terrific spot where the forest is a valued asset across all all of these facets. We have wonderful close ties with the Nicholas School of the Environment still, and then just last year, in a further cementing of our status as a university-wide asset, we came under the umbrella of the new Office of Climate and Sustainability. And this is the office that's now charged with implementing Duke's climate commitment across the entire enterprise. So what I'm going to do to close us out and to prep us for the exciting panel that we'll have to talk about the forest's future, I'm going to share with you how we think today about that mission and those management objectives, which have evolved and expanded over time, but stayed really along the same themes. But because there are so many benefits and so many people receiving those benefits of the forest, we really have to be crystal clear and focused on how we're delivering our mission and how we're delivering on all of those management objectives. And so this year, we updated our strategic plan, and I'm just going to go through and exemplify those 3 core overarching goals of this plan. So the first, of course, is stewardship for sustainability. And this is important because this is where we think about the Duke Forest and its team has natural assets, financial assets, and human assets. How do these all come together? What do we need to be thinking about across those assets to make sure we can keep this forest as a teaching and research asset and also as an anchor for biodiversity, habitat connectivity, and really the essential nature that we all rely on? And so one of the ways we're doing this is our involvement in regional wildlife habitat connectivity work. So this map here shows you the 4-county watershed area in which we are focusing. Those dark blobs towards the top of the map are all Duke Forest lands, so you can get a sense of where these lands, where our lands fit within this. And in effect, what this means is that we're working with our local conservation community, our local land use community, our local transportation community to secure a natural network across our region that will continue to provide for biodiversity and the ecosystem services that underpin our lives here. So teaching and research. Of course, this is our origin, this is our mission, and I believe it always will be. But now we're facilitating teaching and research use across all kinds of audiences, from artists to engineers to any discipline that you can really think of. And also, we're having a lot of good value and use being a proving ground for some new technologies, where scientists here are able to test technologies in the forest before they take them overseas, for example. And now lastly, our community engagement. And this really goes beyond the nature-based recreation. We have an opportunity as a teaching and research laboratory to also help the community connect with science as it's happening on the ground, to come and understand and develop their own insights between the interactions of humans and our environment, and also to help the community learn and be educated in ways that empower them to be stewards of these lands and all of the benefits they provide. So with that, I want to leave you just with one more quote. And it's from Dr. Nan Cohan, and she was the president of this great university from 1993 to 2004. And I was telling Vince earlier that it was very exciting that I actually got to see her on stage with Vince and Dr. Broadhead fairly recently, because this quote of hers it was true at that time, it's just as true now, and I believe it will continue to endure in the future. So Dr. Cohan said, "The forest is one of Duke's most important futures, both from the point of view of our history and our research opportunities, and how it becomes an amazing example of the ways green space can be preserved. The Duke Forest is a showcase of multiple successful pathways to manage land in the middle of a rapidly growing urban environment, and it's part of an institution that sees it as a very important priority to preserve." So, Thank you for coming along this brief journey through time with me. It's really a pleasure to present the Duke Forest as such a remarkable and remarkably enduring asset of Duke Universities. And so with that, I will be happy to take some questions. Tyler, I don't know how much longer we have for questions, but. Okay, great. So I think our staff is going to walk around with microphones if you want to raise your hand.
Sorry. So did Duke Forest plant the beeches and the oaks as well as the loblollies?
No. Fantastic question. So over those 7,100 acres that we manage today, about 2,500 acres either grew up in pine or were actively replanted in pine. And those are really the areas that we actually interacted with. Those other areas, so for example, all around New Hope Creek and its floodplain, those are really some of those areas that were maybe picked over as woodlots, but otherwise had not been completely cleared for agriculture. It's really just the pine trees that we actively manipulated and that we still actively manipulate today. Great question.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
You talked about the past and the present. Where are we going?
Oh my gosh, well, if you just hang out.
Oh, never mind. I didn't.
Perfect segue.
Perfect. This is exciting. If y'all hang out, because we got lots of food and drink for you, you're going to hear about the future. And from not just me, but some really awesome folks like Laurie Benier and Toddy Steelman and Nikki Cagle. So we got you covered. We got you covered. Ken, do you have a question?
Many years ago, I came across the parts of a plane that were scattered among the forest. Obviously, it was not a crash, but an experiment in, I think, ground-based radar.
Oh.
Do you have other people who are using the forest in this way, not for the forest, but for the environment?
Absolutely. So our feature article of this year's log talks about the really rapid increase in the development of drone technologies. And drones are being used quite actively on the forest by researchers, but also by us as managers now. So for example, with this New Hope Creek restoration project that I think you're all a little bit familiar with, we are using drones to fly and remotely sense three-dimensional LiDAR data, but also very high-quality photographic data. So that will be our baseline of seeing what are our pre-conditions before we do this project, and then we're going to fly again and say what are our post-conditions after we do this project. But yeah, Ken, that's an awesome question. Again, one of the huge values of Duke Forest is that folks can pilot their technology out in the woods in some, more of a natural environment before they take them on the road other places. And that might be trying to see how far out over open ocean you can take a drone. So yes, that uptick in research use in just piloting new technology has really been on the rise. Great question. And Judd might know the details on whatever had crashed before that you found. You can talk to him at the break. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. I'm curious about your community engagement strategic plan. And I'm just, sorry, this is like making noise. I'm curious about what kinds of activities that you guys are doing and whether you target certain communities.
Yeah, so that's a really, really great question. We are, as far as whether we target certain communities, that really hasn't been part of our strategy, except we've been trying to create some more opportunities and different opportunities for different types of audiences to engage. But we haven't really been prescriptive about who those folks might be, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I think a lot of our community engagement work now, a lot of our community engagement work, and honestly, since the pandemic, where there was a rampant increase in unauthorized recreation use, has been in a big effort to try to help empower our recreational visitors to also be stewards, to create the volunteer programs like the Forest Stewards and the HERP Community Science program that we do, to really give folks a tangible opportunity to connect with the forest. But we are thinking about that. We're thinking about audiences we don't see out in the forest and what we might do. And that's really part of what's built into the plan, is how do we think about that? Who do we partner with to do that work? What's already happening at Duke in that regard? How do we leverage those things? That kind of work. Yes. Oh, sorry. You're good. Go ahead, Ken. Yes, don't shoot the messenger, but yes. And, you know, that's because we, as humans, we have dramatically changed our environment. We've even dramatically changed our social and cultural structures that would lead us to be naturally culling more deer to provide food for ourselves. So that deer management is probably the most important management program we do, because without it, what you end up with is a forest with a gorgeous canopy and zero regeneration. So what is next then? And I think, and you know, I love my friends at the Eno River State Park, but you can see areas where there's no check, there's no top-down pressure on the deer, and the deer browse is just so rampant that there's just absolutely no forest regeneration occurring. So really, I don't think, and this is something Judd and I talked about when I hadn't been on the forest for very long, like, you know what, this is probably a forever program. This is something that it's our responsibility to help take care of, because the top predators have been long extirpated, and we don't really have much of a hunting culture anymore. So we're going to have to actively engage in this work to try to do, you know, promote the forest health and promote the forest regeneration. But great question. Yes.
Hi, I just moved here from the north a month ago, and
Yay.
I'm so grateful to be able to hike in the Duke Forest every day, and it's just gorgeous. But I'm absolutely fascinated by the loblolly pines, and I wondered if you could tell me, are they just indigenous to the Carolinas, or if you could just elaborate a little bit more on them, because they just have the most gorgeous bark I've ever seen.
Oh, well, you know, that's great. They're the money tree. No, I say that as a joke. So loblolly pine is a fascinating story. So they are one of the 5 southern yellow pine species. So they are native, their natural range is across the south and the southeast. But before rampant human development and you know, farming and so forth, they would have been constricted to a much smaller range than you see them now. We planted them everywhere because they're fast growers. So, you know, to the tune of reducing the longleaf pines range from 100 million down to only 3 million acres, because loblolly were preferred for the perception that they grew faster, because they do above ground, but not below ground. And so compared to the longleaf, that makes them much more susceptible to wind throw, to fires, and other events like that. So the loblolly is a fantastic and beautiful tree, and you should still appreciate it. But it is occupying a lot of other range where we probably would have had a mix of other species and other southern yellow pine species, like shortleaf pine and things like that. Great question.
I loved your history and have enjoyed spending time in the forest. I recently read in the Hillsborough Historic Foundation a little bit more controversial story of the quarry acquisition from George Mayo. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Well, I will. So we had also some of us, so Dr. Nikki Cagle, who's going to be on the panel with me, is one of our advisory committee members, and we pay attention to a lot of historical information. And if anything comes to the surface that involves Duke Forest, we usually check it out. And so we had occasion to see Rodney Mayo's presentations that he's done over the last couple years that tells the oral history of his family and these quarry lands. So this was actually the motivation for us reaching out to Rodney. We met him up in Hillsborough, understood and heard a little bit more about his family's oral history, looked at the notes that we have about the history through the time, trying to see what matched up and what didn't. And so what I'll say is that the most important thing that came out of that is that the Mayo family still has a 1-acre cemetery that's essentially sandwiched between now the Hillsborough division all around it and some neighborhoods on the other side. And we were able to take Rodney and his mother and some of his uncles and aunts out to that cemetery and give them access, because otherwise they don't really have access to their family cemetery. So the only other thing I can tell you about that right now is that that came up and was investigated very thoroughly from a legal perspective in the 1970s. And I have a folder this thick in my office that details that examination of the title and whether there was some way that George Mayo may have still had title to that land. And ultimately it was found that that wasn't the case, and under a couple different stipulations. But of course, this, we don't know all the details there. We know what's officially recorded. We know what documents have been kept. And I think this, going back to the beginning of my presentation, is why it's so important to just explore, understand, let the past inform you, let the past keep you curious. And so Nikki and I are actually involved in a project where we want to try to map all of the families that had land that became the Duke Forest, to understand their stories a bit more. Great question.
Any question that's more back to the future?
Yeah.
What do you think about, given the fact that the forest land is kind of splintered into different segments, what do you think about the danger of development creeping into that area? Because the Arrowhead neighborhood, for example, had big discussions about zoning laws being changed in Durham and so forth.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm running over time here. My team needs to wave at me, but I will say briefly that what we try to do as the Duke Forest is protect our boundaries and try to prevent any additional fragmentation. Now, of course, what happens along our boundaries can change as local land use policies, ordinance, et cetera, change. And we do try to pay attention to that where we can. So I think that is a reality that we live out in the world, out across 3 different counties with various municipalities and county rules and regulations. And that is just something for us to be aware of and to participate in that process when they do come up. But yeah, that shape of the forest, it's a very edgy forest. There are over 85 miles of boundary line that Tom and Craig and Zach have to manage and maintain. It's very edgy. I think the edge to area ratio is like 8-to-1. It's very high. 1 minute? One more question? Anybody?
What's your favorite part of the forest?
Oh. Okay, I'm going to answer that. But Jamie? James, did you also have a question? You can yell at me.
My question is there an app or something like iNaturalist or something along that sort that people unaffiliated with Duke Forest can sort of help with some of the research? Because I know there are apps out there that sort of citizen scientists, if you will, can gather details.
So we don't have any research projects going on in the forest right now in which that kind of crowdsourced data would be helpful. But my friends here in the room, like Julie Tuttle, who are ecologists that care about where box turtles are, and all of that work that we've done to map the natural network across the area has depended on crowdsourcing data such as you describe. So iNaturalist can be very important. We always have to be careful about promoting the use of apps on the Duke Forest, though, because it leads people astray to unauthorized areas and into places we want to really protect and keep human and dog paws off of. But I do think, you know, if you're walking along the trail and you see a box turtle, or it's, yeah, wonderful. And scientists, real deal scientists, do look to that information to help them build models and other things. Okay, my favorite spot in the Corston Division, New Hope Creek. All right, well, I really, really appreciate you all coming out, listening to me for so long. Please enjoy some more refreshments and some more drinks, but please do stick around for the amazing panel that we're gonna have in just a few minutes.
Thank you. If everyone can make their way back to their seats, please, we're going to go ahead and get started with tonight's panel discussion, the second half of tonight's event. As everyone's finding their seat, I hope you all enjoyed Sara's presentation as much as I did and learned about how the forest has supported the university's mission for nearly nearly an entire century. Sorry. With that context in mind, the purpose of tonight's panel is to discuss the forest future from various perspectives. It is now my privilege to introduce the moderator of tonight's panel, the current Dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment, a school with which, as we just learned, the Duke Forest shares a deep, rich history and ongoing partnership. Dr. Lori Benier began a 2-year term as interim standback dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment in 2023. She is a professor of energy economics and policy at the Nicholas School and holds secondary appointments at Duke in the Department of Economics and in the Sanford School of Public Policy. In her role as dean, Dr. Benier serves as the chair of the Duke Forest Advisory Committee. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Lori Benier.
A cricket alarm. Thank you, Tyler. And again, welcome back, everyone. I'm pleased to, we didn't have very much attrition at the break, which is excellent. Through this panel discussion, we're going to explore Duke Forest's role as a teaching and research laboratory, its importance as a vital anchor for forest, field, and aquatic habitats in our growing region, and its status as beloved community resource for connecting with nature and history. We hope that each of you leave tonight feeling hopeful about the forest's future and energized about the dynamic ways it will continue to serve Duke and our local communities. So let me now welcome our amazing panel of awesome women with some very brief bios. First up, Dr. Toddy Steelman. Toddy is the immediate past dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment and is now the inaugural vice president and vice provost of the Office of Climate and Sustainability, which you learned from Sara is now where the forest lives institutionally. In this role, Toddy is the administrative and academic lead for Duke's climate commitment, and the forest, I told you all this already, the forest and his team now report up. Her research focuses on community responses to wildfire and wildfire management, particularly of large interjurisdictional wildfires. So she is a forester at heart. So we'll welcome Toddy. I'm going to do all three, and then you all three can come up. All right. Second is Dr. Nicolette Cagle. Nikki is a senior lecturer in ecology and environmental education at the Nicholas School, and also, I'm very grateful, serves as my associate dean of diversity, equity, inclusion. She's a leading educator who leverages the forest for experiential learning, advises the Forest Community Science Initiative, guides critical student research on forest-related questions, and also serves on the Duke Forest Advisory Committee. She has a recent book out called Saving Snakes, which is a 5-star review on Amazon. Buy from your local book dealer and enjoy learning all about the amazing snakes that Nikki loves. Sara Childs as you already know because she was just up here, leads the office of the Duke Forest and has done so for over a decade. She guides strategic efforts to advance the forest's position as a university and community-wide resource. And as the executive administrator, she works with fellow Duke leaders to advance university-wide goals. She holds an adjunct instructor position at the Nicholas School and is a founding member of the Regional Triangle Connectivity Collaborative. I also taught her once upon a time, as well as her husband, Rush, who is there. And for those of you who are parents, you know, every once in a while your child does something so amazing and you think, if I was just a little bit responsible for that awesomeness, I've lived a good life. As a professor, every once in a while a former student does something so amazing that you think, if I was just a little bit responsible for that, I've led a good life. And Sara, what you just did was awesome. What you do every day is awesome. We are so proud to have you at Duke. And as a Nicholas School alum, and Rush, you're not so bad either. So if we welcome to the stage Toddy, Nikki, and Sara. I told you I might make you cry a little bit.
Your program evaluation course taught me how to think about everything I see in the world.
Yeah, so see, I might have been just a teensy bit responsible. Well, I'm gonna take it as a win, okay? All right, everybody. We're going to start with a question to all three of you, and I think I'll probably start with Toddy and work our way to Sara. But what exciting possibilities do you see for the forest over the next 20 years? Somebody asked this before. Was it you, Jason? I can't help it. Okay, so this is Jason's question. What exciting possibilities do you see for the forest over the next 20 years as we adapt to the environmental challenges and new opportunities?
Thank you, Lori. A real pleasure to be here, and thank you, everybody, for coming out to this amazing event tonight. So I will start and answer that question with the challenges I think that we're going to face over the next 20 years. We already face them in some respects. Fragmentation, urbanization, development are profound pressures on the forest, and only will continue to be more profound, I think, on the forest. And so the forest has an opportunity into the future to continue to be an oasis, a refuge basically for wildlife, for people, continue to function as a distinctive land asset for us as a community, demonstrate the important role that landscapes and forests can play in an urbanizing environment for our students, our faculty, our staff, and our community at large. And so I really think that this idea of the forest as a refuge is going to be only more important as we move into the future.
Thank you all for having me here today. I'm so excited. I love the Duke Forest like so much, it's so hard to contain myself. If I had to really say what I think the Duke Forest is going to be in 20 years, I think it's going to be a center for flourishing. And I mean flourishing in terms of the natural world, and flourishing for all of you if you're still hanging out in the Duke Forest 20 years from now, and flourishing for students. I see it as an incredible resource both for the natural world, the natural community, and for everyone in this room, and so many more users and visitors and people in our community. If I was forced to get a little more granular, I would start by thinking about some of the things the Duke Forest already does well. And so one of the things the Duke Forest already does well is adaptive management. And so I see it being at that leading edge or cutting edge of adaptive forest management moving forward. And this might look like doing comparative habitat restorations, using experimental design to even create habitat. Who knows, right? The possibilities here are endless. The other thing that the Duke Forest already does really well is advanced knowledge and discovery. And so I think this is something that will just continue to happen. We're set up, we have the infrastructure, we have the support, we have fantastic leadership. And so we are set up to host amazing research, and research not just in the natural sciences, but in the social sciences and anthropology. We can think about art and education as well. And then the other thing I see the Duke Forest already doing really well is serving as a hub for experiential education. And so this also, I think, is just going to expand. We have students from Durham Public Schools, students from the university engaging in the forest, and I see us in the future ramping up those engagements because they're going to be even more important. The Duke Forest is there, but the surrounding habitat, the woods all around it are disappearing, and students in our community are going to need those woods more than ever to have some basic needs met.
Wow. So those are lots of exciting things for the next 20 years. And I think all I would add is that, to Nikki's point, I see a real role for the forest continuing in its work with its regional partners in the Triangle Connectivity Collaborative. The forest becoming an increasingly isolated island in the future does not bode well for its resilience and all of the benefits that it provides to all of us. I also think we have so much opportunity. As you all know, I'm now under the umbrella of the Office of Climate and Sustainability. Toddy is my amazing boss now, and we have so much work we want to do to advance climate and sustainability fluency, and not just for students here at Duke, but for staff and administration and the public surrounding us. And so again, back to connecting to what Nikki said, so much more opportunity, I think, in our future for experiential education around some of these big issues we're facing in climate and sustainability going forward.
Great, thank you all. So I want to follow up a little bit on the research mission. So obviously when Clarence Korshian came, he's an ecologist, was really interested in the research around the forest. You told the great story about how Norm Christensen found those old files on a filing cabinet. What do all these numbers on the trees mean? And it turns out they had meaning. And they published some amazing papers out of that, the FACE study. What groundbreaking research opportunities could the forest unlock in the near future, and how might they change the way we understand the natural world? We'll go the opposite way. We'll start with you, Sara, and we'll work our way back to Toddy.
Okay, well, the thing that strikes me first is exploration of the below ground biomass and its contribution to the health and resilience of our forest. That would be super exciting. In general, y'all, my role is to facilitate whatever anybody wants to do out there that has purpose and meaning in terms of research. So I'm happy to do that as well, but that is a particular area I think that we could really benefit and gain from understanding. I love and have thought for a long time about some of this idea that Nikki shared about, these comparative restorations and understanding what it looks like to restore a forest in an urbanizing environment through different processes, what works well, what doesn't. I think there's a lot of sort of restoration, conservation in practice research work that could be done. And then the last piece, which I'm already seeing so much, and I've already emphasized, we facilitate researchers and scientists piloting all kinds of new tech, from radar that penetrates through the ground to drones that capture, down to a microcentimeter of imagery. And so there's just, I think, a lot of opportunity with technology as well, and that contributing to the way we manage the forest. So I'll stop there.
I'm gonna try to tone it down a little bit and contain myself. One of the things that I want to emphasize, I'm going to talk mostly about the natural sciences because I'm an ecologist, but I do think there's a lot of space in the social science for a lot of research opportunity in the social sciences, particularly around environmental education, environmental psychology, environmental identity development. What happens to a person when they're out in the woods? It's something that we're still exploring and every day learning more about. In terms of ecology, I spent some time going through some papers about the fundamental questions in ecology and trying to think a little bit about how the Duke Forest is positioned to answer some of those and which ones the Duke Forest is positioned to answer. And some of the fundamental questions in ecology have to do with ecological pattern and process through time. And in Sara's presentation, you saw already that we had transects from the 1930s, right? So we have already, with Norm Christensen's and Bob Pete's work, done some of that time series analysis. But the climate is changing, the habitat around the forest is changing, so we need to continue to do that long time scale work. And we have the data to do that with. That's an unbelievable strength of the Duke Forest. The other thing is thinking about biodiversity patterns at scale. The Duke Forest is 7,100 acres, which means that we have enough land there to do things like landscape analysis, microhabitat analysis, and things in between, stand analysis. So trying to figure out how patterns and processes interact between scales is another sort of question that could be addressed in the Duke Forest, and people have been starting to do that work already. I think, too, there's some salamander research that goes on in the Duke Forest, and there are lots of cool questions to ask about epigenetics, how the environment changes the way genes are expressed. A lot of cool questions to ask about what happens at the genomic level or evolutionarily when species are at the edge of their range. And so I think particularly with the salamanders and the herpetofauna in the forest, we're well placed to think about a lot of genetic and evolutionary questions.
Very good. I have to figure out what you both haven't said, and now what I've got left over to say. So I am going to focus on a couple of different dimensions, maybe picking up a few threads. I think that the way AI could be used in the forest is really intriguing. Like, I think the next generation of work that's coming with AI, we've really been focused on these large language models, but we're moving into video and to pictures and what that can look like. And I think that's a really rich area for the use of AI in forests. We can learn a lot. It might accelerate our learning, but we're not quite there yet. But I think that's interesting to think about and where that might come from. I think, Nikki, you touched on this, the role of forests and how we need, I'll come back to this word again, refuge for our mental health. Is another area, just in terms of like when you go out into a forest, the benefits that we all feel psychologically and the mental health benefits. I think that's just one more area that I think is in need of a lot of work. And as areas continue to shrink, the fragmentation grows. Large areas like the Duke Forest that actually provide those benefits, I think, is really important as well. And then I think it's not as nuanced as what you said, Nikki, but I think this idea that we are living in a changing climate and we have an incredible living laboratory of the Duke Forest to learn about the effects of climate change in that environment is pretty remarkable. So we're going to see hurricanes, we're going to see ice storms, we're going to see drought, we're going to see changes in tree composition. As it gets warmer, the trees that are in their southernmost range are going to start to migrate north, and we're going to see trees that are in, from the southernmost or the northernmost areas migrate have trouble as well, migrate south in terms of what's happening there. So we see this happening in our oceans in terms of where fish species are migrating up and down given the change. And we would expect to see this also in our forests. And so I think that's just interesting to think about how critters as well as their habitats are going to be migrating and moving. And we've got a large enough area where we can actually see some of that work take place.
That's great. I'll just add, as the interim dean at the Nicholas School, we're so grateful that we have the forest as this teaching and research resource. You guys are always amazing. We take our introductory students out to the forest, and the head of our drones lab flies drones, and they get to look at that. We've got PhD students doing their doctoral research there. We've got faculty. I know Tong Chu is here. He did his postdoc at Duke, and we've now stolen him back from Penn State as one of our newest assistant professors doing amazing work with sensing and satellite imaging in the forest. So it is really an exceptional resource that we're really privileged to have. So thank you for that. I want to pivot back a little bit to stewardship of this land, the 7,000 plus acres. So there are two questions here, which I'm going to take the moderator's liberty of kind of combining, all right? So how can Duke Forest redefine what sustainable land management looks like? And then in particular, in an area of the country with a lot of pressure for urban development, how can we use it to craft creative solutions that also support thriving habitats? Todd, you get to go first this time. Sorry.
Very good. Very good. So I think when we think about stewardship, and Sara, you hit on this on your presentation, I think it is absolutely essential that we continue to actively manage for wildlife and our forests to demonstrate what a real working forest looks like in an area, an urbanizing environment that is going to only lose more touch with what it means to live on the land. And so the more we can do to not only actively manage, but then educate our faculty, staff, students, and larger community about why that is important only becomes more important. And I think it's essential. And, Ken asked the question about the deer management. That will only be more important because the critters only are going to have a smaller area to go to, and if we want to maintain habitats, but we have to explain why we do what we do. Because that's a pretty sophisticated management action, culling of deer herds that doesn't easily translate to a public that might not be so tolerant in understanding why it's essential. But that it is essential, I think, going forward. And then I think the other part of stewardship, and Sara, you demonstrated this so beautifully in your presentation, is connecting to and explaining and reconciling with our history. That I think is only going to become more important as we continue to move into the future. So I think those are the two big elements that I would hit in terms of the importance of stewardship into the future.
Nikki?
So one of the things that I've been thinking about is how we manage in general. And, when you go to the doctor, a lot of times you have a symptom, and then the doctor will look at your symptoms and say you have an infection, you get antibiotics. And then, you go to the doctor again a month later, and you go to the doctor again a month later. And really what's happening to you, you might be getting a bunch of colds or infections, but there's something going on in your life that's bigger, the way that you're living, the stress that's affecting you, that's bigger. That's making you sick. And so when I think about the potential for management in the future in the Duke Forest, it's something that is holistic, that we, Aldo Leopold called ecologists ecological doctors. And I want the forest to be stewarded in such a way that we're one of those holistic medicine doctors, right? That we're thinking about things super broadly and doing things like explicitly considering systems thinking approaches, interconnectedness, exploring possibilities of scale, thinking about different perspectives. One of the reasons that I feel comfortable saying that here, because I wouldn't feel comfortable in a lot of circumstances saying this, is because I know the forest and I see the way you put together that presentation, the conversations that the staff have, and they do think holistically. And we're all here in this room because our perspectives matter to the forest. And so that perspective taking is already there. The holistic thinking is already there, and I think that's going to be really key to successful management in the face of all these environmental changes, and particularly in the face of urban development.
So those are really a lot of great thoughts and input, and I'm going to be put my boots on manager and tell you what I think about on the forest and what's facing the forest in the next 20 years, and what I wonder about if we can plan for some adaptive management around. And that's some of the non-native invasive pests that are coming our way, that are already here, that might, we just had an emerald ash borer basically disappear ash trees from the forests across the eastern seaboard. I feel like this is an epic thing we have just lived through, and we don't really understand the implications on the ecosystem of that. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, even at the edge of what we already know is coming or maybe already here, and what that means for the future forest and how we have to manage it. So I think that's really important, and something, if Tom was here still, I'm like, Tom, we got to build into our managed plan all the scary things that are coming and what we might do about them and where we might do nothing and where we might need help. And we haven't quite flesh that out as much as I know that we need to, given how rapidly things are changing around us. But I think, to your point, Nikki, we do a great job of already managing holistically and being prepared for these things. And I think, again, to Toddy's point, that stewardship of the land, how much more can we learn from connecting with the families that the land came from? How much more can we learn from connecting more closely with the Okanichi Band, with connecting with the Native American Society out of Raleigh and in the Triangle? What kind of more traditional ecological knowledge can we bring in? I think, again, that's something, it feels related to the work you and I, the journey we're on a bit, but feels enough different that I wanted to mention that too. So yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Awesome. So we all lived through the pandemic. A lot of us spent as much time as we could outside because, we needed to. And you mentioned before, Sara, in your talk about, the stress that put on the forest, the amount of recreation activity that was coming from the community. But the resource is very valuable to the broader Triangle community, particularly around recreation. So knowing that the forest has limits and how much recreational activity it can absorb, how can we rethink recreational access to foster a deeper appreciation for nature while also advancing our conservation goals? Small problem, Sara.
Well, Laurie, I think in a way we're already working on this, so it doesn't feel so daunting to me. I think, and Blake will know this because we really lived this together in those pandemic years, when the onslaught of recreational use came to the forest, that same proportion of unauthorized use just was a bigger piece now, right? And we realized frantically that all of these digital map-based apps were driving use all over the Duke Forest in places that had nothing to do with what the maps we've had in place forever showed. And so I think something we did in response was actually try to exercise some control and authority over, here's the actual representation of the Duke Forest, and distribute that freely. So that's something we did that I think is helping. We also seriously investigated, with the help of this amazing student, how these digital apps were driving use and where we might be able to have some intervention. And that might be, talking to the legal teams in Silicon Valley, which we've done before. So I think but we've also had great partnership with the program, with the NAP All Trails, that wants to empower managers to give them the ability to represent their lands well, so that recreation doesn't become just sort of this overrun situation that we see in our national parks sometimes. And the last thing I would have to say, right, and huge shout out to Maggie Harity when she came on as senior program coordinator. we said, listen, we've got in mind, we need a forest stewards program. We need more eyes on the ground, but more importantly, we need those eyes on the ground to be ambassadors for us, to help folks know, why do we say this is the right thing to do and this is the wrong thing to do? What does it actually mean on the ground for the forest and the future of the forest? And so those forest stewards, we love y'all. It's an awesome program. And I think things like that are really important to keep going.
Anybody else have thoughts? Nikki?
Yeah.
Yeah, Nikki's like, I have thoughts.
I have thoughts on so many things. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is the Duke Forest is a community. It's a community of people, plants, animals, and a bunch of other microorganisms and other taxa that we have a little bit hard time distinguishing and remembering. And when you're really in community, you care for your community members. And so when I'm thinking about how we address this issue of recreational access, I think part of it is making sure that we can all learn how to care for our community. And so there are a lot of ways that we can help each other learn about caring for the community that's the Duke Forest. That might look like expanding some of the programs that Maggie's been leading. It might look like intentional guided experiences that discuss ecological understandings, cultural history, and conservation priorities. It might look like conversations, small group conversations. It could be experiences that emphasize nature connection so that we're caring for ourselves as well, doing some forest bathing, meditative walking for our own health. It might look like new interpretive trails and signage. Maybe some of that's already in the works. Additional volunteer steward days. You know, there's a lot of community building activities that we can do. Those things also require a lot of time and resources from the forest. And so concomitant with all these things that we need to do to care for our community and learn how to care for our community, we're also going to need more resources.
I don't think I can do any better than that.
Okay. I couldn't for sure, so I get that completely. So we still have a few minutes, and we have a wildfire expert on the panel, and we do prescribe burns in the forest. So I'm going to go off script. We've all witnessed the massive increase in wildfires, particularly in the West, but not exclusively in the West. The damage to the ecosystems, the air quality. Knock on, there's no wood around here. There's some over there. Knock over there. You know, we haven't experienced that nearly to the same extent in the southeastern forests. But are there any lessons that we can take from management of the southeastern forest that could actually help us manage or mitigate or reduce the risk of wildfires in the rest of the country? I'm going to start with you, Tati. Sorry, I'm totally off script, so I'm really putting her on the spot. But okay. It is her, like, it's her thing, so I feel okay with it.
It's good. It's good. Well, I mean, I think we've been very fortunate that we live in an area in the southeast that has traditionally not had to manage, at least where we are for wildfire, like in the eastern part of the states, we have a lot of wildfire, especially in our longleaf areas and the sandhills. And so that's really fun, but less so in the deciduous area forests that we have here. But we do have an active fire program in the forest to burn because it is a part of keeping the ecology healthy. And I think that's another part of the active management that's important to demonstrate, because when people see smoke, then they know that it's not necessarily a bad thing. They're burning on the forest, and that keeps the forest healthy. So I think that's really important. But the world is changing, right? And with climate change, what you get is vegetation that dries out. We get longer periods of drought. We get intense rainstorms that then follow. And we could perhaps experience more and larger fire in our forests. It wasn't, about 10 years ago, there was a huge fire basically that took place in western Tennessee that caught everybody off guard. 2,400 houses were destroyed and scores of people ended up dying because it was just so unexpected to have a fire in that environment. And this week, we've had fires in Manhattan, if anybody's been following the news. That's bonkers. If you just think about that. So I think, the lessons that I take away from that are, it's like, just because we've been quote unquote safe in the past does not apply to the future. And preparedness is our best anecdote basically, to, preparing for what could come. And, fortunately, we got an amazing manager over there who has got her eye on that ball. So, but Sara probably has some ideas about that as well.
No, I think, Toddy, the changing climate conditions, right? We've been lucky partly because we used to, we get 39 inches of rainfall spread throughout the year. That's very different from the West. We've been lucky in that we've got these patterns of private land ownership that make it blocky, and so fire can't necessarily carry as far. But again, as Toddy's indicating, as we get into these flashier conditions, whether they're wet or whether they're dry, that's when I start to think about, what are we susceptible to now that we've kind of taken for granted we don't have to think so much about and worry about? And, we're pretty constrained on how much prescribed fire we can put on the forest just because we have smoke-sensitive areas all around us in a lot of cases. But I think, again, it would take some more resources, but I think one of the ways, and not that the folks in the West don't already know this, but as much prescribed fire as we can get out there to reduce some fuels would be great, and be probably really helpful for the ecology, because we know our deciduous forests burn. They're just more of a fire return of 500 to 1,000 years or something like that. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, Laurie, and yeah.
One of the things that I'm hearing is that we need to fight fire with fire.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. But it also makes me think that in doing so, we also have something to learn from Indigenous peoples. Yes. And when Sara and I have talked with Vicki Jeffries, the tribal administrator for the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, one of the ways that she taught us that her people have historically managed the landscape is with fire. And so I think that there's also an opportunity when we're doing our fire management to live into the values of connecting with community, learning from traditional ecological knowledge, and really bringing in the full array of stakeholders into the discussion. Also, just something to point out that maybe people don't know, but this area did have fire in it pretty regularly. And a lot of our area was Piedmont prairie, or a mosaic of prairie habitats surrounded by forest lands and riparian buffers. And so what we see today, or think of the Piedmont today as unbroken forest, really will have looked a lot different historically.
Great, thank you. So this is a question that came in from one of the event registrants that I'm going to toss up to you as we near the end of this panel. 50 years from now, well, I'm not going to be alive, but okay, 50 years from now, what do you dream the forest will look like? What new stories will it tell?
This is a Nikki question.
Yeah,
for sure.
Nikki, you start us off.
Okay, the way that I wanted to think about this question was from the perspective of an oak tree, right? So imagine yourself as an oak tree still alive 50 years from now, a big, beautiful white oak with a flaky bark. And one of the things that I imagine is all the stories that this oak tree could tell us. And so the oak tree might bear witness with its tree rings. Maybe there's going to be some scars from fires. Hopefully, a little fires, right? Not big scars there, just little scars from fires, or remnants of bird nests in its branches, or some of the bat species that are declining precipitously. Maybe they're going to be nesting, the single male bats, in the flakes of its bark. So that's a story that it could tell us in the forest 50 years from now. The tree might also have seen people gathering at its base, engaging in environmental art, in storytelling, telling stories. And maybe it's seen hundreds of students going about their day in the forest, collecting data, finding snakes and salamanders, because that's going to be the most life-changing thing for them. And really, it's going to see people gaining experience that leads to positive change, helps them become better stewards of the environment, and them also becoming better, healthier, more well-rounded people as a result.
And this is why she always wins all the teaching awards, just if you were wondering. Okay. Anyone else want to follow that?
I'll take a shot at this. Just sort of a short, when I think about where we could be in 50 years, I would love the forest. So I'll start with the fact that because it is a university managed forest, we have the luxury as universities to be able to think in the long term, right? And invest in the long term. And the forest is a living, breathing example of that, our dedication to that. And I think that's really exciting. So when I think about the future, I think about the forest should continue to be a living testimonial to the resilience and healing and restoration that can take place not only in the land but within us. And I think we're really going to need that in 50 years. When we think about where we could be in 50 years. But if you go back 100 years to the beautiful slides that Sara had for us tonight, and you see what that landscape looked like when it was sort of abandoned farmland that had been growing cotton and tobacco and wheat and corn, and where we are today with what the forest can look like. I think that's really inspirational because we know the land wants to heal itself if we give it the chance. And I think if we give the land that chance and if we give ourselves that chance, it has so many lessons for us. So that's my hope for it.
Well, it's hard to top those. But Judd and I know that in 50 years we'll be cutting down some trees because that's nominally our rotation length on the Duke Forest, and wood is a super important product and only becoming more important in the global market. So that will be happening. But I think, obviously everything you all said, and gosh, 50 years from now, and as practitioners and ecologists and foresters, we do think about these long time frames. I just imagine that Duke's commitment to this forest remains so solid and strong, that the ecology of the forest is thriving, that there's flourishing both ecologically and in the community within the Duke Forest and around the Duke Forest. I can imagine from some of the work we're doing now on restoration, maybe we have more freshwater mussels up and down New Hope Creek cleaning our water for us. That's work we're starting right now. And that's stuff that could actually transpire. So I just think, I think the forest is a beautiful future because we all care about it. We're thinking hard about it. We're taking care of it, and we're absolutely committed to it.
Thank you. Yes. Round of applause. So before I call Tyler back up here, can we just give a round of applause to these amazing panelists? I have been at Duke my entire academic career, over 20 years, started as a young assistant professor. I've always been impressed with how Duke has enabled women leaders to really excel, and being on this panel today with these three amazing women leaders makes me even prouder of that. So thank you all, and thank you all for coming. I think Tyler's going to say that, but I'm going to say it now. It was cold and rainy, and you love the forest, and you're here with us this evening, and we're really grateful for that. So with that, I'll call you back up, Tyler, and again, thanks to the panel.
Thank you to the panel, and also thank you to our moderator, Lori Benier. Give Lori a round of applause as well. I know at this point you guys are probably sick and tired of seeing me up here, but I promise this is the last time you'll see me tonight, but hopefully not forever. As you leave here today, we encourage each of you to deepen your connection with the Duke Forest in a way that is meaningful for you. We have a couple different ways that you can do that. We offer 2 volunteer programs, which were talked about a couple times tonight. One is our Herpetofauna, or HERP, community science program, and those volunteers are an important part of our strategic vision to engage the public in science and nature, and to protect the biodiversity of natural resources of the Duke Forest. We also have the Forest Stewards program, which is a volunteer corps that supports the research, teaching, conservation, and community engagement missions. And we will be publicizing more information online and via email about these programs and applications to join them early next year. You can also become a friend of the forest with a yearly donation of $50 or more to support our work. Your generosity will strengthen the Duke Forest as a vibrant and rich resource for teaching, research, natural resource stewardship, and community engagement. And staying informed and engaged is also super easy. You can simply join our email list, follow us on social media for the latest news and events, and on your way out, we have hot off the press copies of this year's log publication, which if you are a graduate of the forestry program or a friend of the forest, you will hopefully be, if you haven't already, receiving it in your mailbox this week. So yeah, grab those on your way out. We are truly grateful to everyone who participated in today's program and helped to make this event a success, including President Price, Toddy Steelman, Lori Benier, Sara Childs, Nikki Cagle, the entire Duke Forest staff, and many, many others that you see up here. Thank you all for braving the rain, for celebrating with us, and for supporting the future of the Duke Forest. Please have a safe journey home, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.